The black maid agreed to dance with the Mafia boss and changed his life forever. Lena Carter had never imagined that her life would take such a dramatic turn. Working as a maid in the prestigious Romano household was a job she had come to accept, though it wasn't one she had ever dreamed of. The mansion was filled with luxury that contrasted sharply with her own humble existence. The chandeliers, the polished marble floors, the expensive paintings on every wall, all of it seemed so far out of her reach. But she had learned to keep her head down, do her work, and stay invisible. It was safer that way. But tonight, things were different. Tonight, Lena had been asked to serve at an extravagant party thrown by the family, a gathering that included some of the most powerful figures in New York. As she moved through the room, carrying drinks and offering polite smiles, she tried to ignore the whispered conversations and the judgmental stares. That was until she saw him, the man everyone feared, the one who commanded the room without a single word. Vince Romano, the Mafia boss, sat at the head of a long table, his dark eyes scanning the room like a hawk. His sharp jawline and intimidating presence were enough to make anyone nervous, but it was his power that made him untouchable. Lena had heard the rumors about him, his empire, his ruthlessness, and his ability to destroy anyone who crossed him. And yet, there he was, seated at the table, seemingly indifferent to the wealth and the grandeur surrounding him. She tried to look away, but her eyes betrayed her. There was something about him that drew her in, despite the danger that his presence represented. Just as she was about to turn away, their eyes met. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. Vince's gaze was cold, assessing, as if he could see straight through her. Lena's heart raced. She quickly looked down, trying to regain her composure. But then, to her shock, he spoke. "Would you care to dance?" His voice was low, smooth, but there was a firmness to it that left no room for refusal. Lena hesitated, the room around her suddenly feeling smaller, more suffocating. The other guests were watching, their eyes flickering with curiosity and disbelief. This was insane. She was just a maid, a servant, who wasn't even supposed to be noticed. But here was the Mafia boss, asking her to dance. It was the last thing she expected, and the first thing she knew she couldn't refuse. Lena began, but the words caught in her throat. The pressure of the moment, the overwhelming attention from everyone in the room, made it hard to think clearly. But then, something inside her shifted. She wasn't just a maid. She was a woman, a person who had the right to be seen, to be heard. And so, without fully understanding why, she nodded. Yes. The moment she agreed, something changed. The music swelled, and Vince rose from his seat, extending his hand to her. As she placed her hand in his, she felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. The dance floor was suddenly theirs, and the rest of the world seemed to fade away. As they moved together, Lena felt the weight of her past, her struggles, and her loneliness slowly melting away. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged. Vince, too, seemed changed. His usual cold demeanor softened, and for a fleeting moment, she saw a side of him that was almost human. There, in the middle of the dance floor, something had shifted. Neither of them could have known then, but this one dance would alter the course of both their lives forever. The music played softly in the background, and for a moment, Lena was lost in the rhythm. She had danced before, but never like this. Never with someone like Vince Romano. She felt his presence close to hers, strong yet strangely comforting. His hand rested lightly on her waist, guiding her with a steady, confident touch. He was a man who commanded rooms, who made people listen with just a glance. But tonight, he was simply her partner on the dance floor. The movement was slow, graceful, almost serene. Vince was not just a Mafia boss tonight. He was a man like any other. And as Lena moved with him, she felt something stir within her, something she hadn't expected, a sense of belonging. The room, once filled with the chatter of the guests, had faded into the background. It was just the two of them now, dancing in their own world. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the intensity in his dark eyes. But it was different this time. It wasn't judgment or command. It was something softer, something more human. For a few minutes, nothing else mattered. Not the wealth surrounding them, not the rules that kept her in her place, not the judgment she had lived with her entire life. There was only the music, the dance, and the feeling that, just for tonight, she was more than just a maid. She was a woman, dancing with the most powerful man in the room. When the song ended, Vince didn't immediately pull away. Instead, he kept his hand on her waist, his fingers slightly tightening, as if he wasn't ready to let go just yet. Lena's heart raced, but she didn't know why. Was it the proximity? The unexpected kindness? Or something else altogether? She glanced up at him, her eyes meeting his, and saw the faintest flicker of something. Curiosity, maybe, or surprise. "You're a good dancer," he said quietly, his voice softer than she had imagined it would be. His words caught her off guard, and she couldn't help but smile, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you," she replied, unsure of what else to say. She wasn't used to compliments. She wasn't used to being seen, let alone noticed for something other than her role as a servant. Vince nodded, still holding her. The room had gone quiet, and all the guests were watching them, but he seemed completely unaware of their gaze. He wasn't a man who cared about the opinions of others, and for the first time, Lena wasn't afraid of that fact. She wasn't afraid of him. It was an odd feeling, empowerment through something as simple as a dance. But it wasn't just the dance. It was the unspoken connection between them. Other guests were standing in small groups. "I think it's time we let them have their turn," he said, his voice almost playful. Lena nodded, still unsure of what to make of the entire situation. She had danced with him, the most feared man in New York, and now he was treating her like she belonged here. As they made their way back to the edge of the room, the murmurs of the guests grew louder. There were glances, raised eyebrows, and whispered comments, but Vince paid them no mind. He never did. Lena, however, couldn't shake the feeling that she had just crossed a line she could never uncross. For the first time, she had been in the spotlight, and it hadn't been a bad thing. Vince stopped near a small group of his associates, nodding briefly in acknowledgement before turning his attention back to Lena. "You should take a break," he said, his tone still calm, almost caring. "Go have something to drink. I'll join you in a moment." She was about to protest, to say that she should continue working, but he gave her a look that told her this was not a suggestion. It was an order, but one wrapped in kindness. Lena hesitated for a moment before nodding, her heart still pounding in her chest. She walked away from the dance floor, trying to steady her breathing, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. As she made her way to the bar, she found herself thinking about the man she had just danced with. Vince Romano, the Mafia boss. He had made her feel seen. He had made her feel valued. And for the first time, she was beginning to wonder if there was more to him than the stories people told. Perhaps, just perhaps, tonight wasn't going to be like every other night. Perhaps, this night would change everything. Lena walked toward the bar, her mind racing. The soft glow of the dimly lit room seemed to heighten her senses. She could hear the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversations, and yet, all she could focus on was the man who had just asked her to dance. Vince Romano, the Mafia boss, the one everyone feared, the one who controlled everything with a mere glance. And yet, here he was, acting so different. Lena's hand shook slightly as she reached for a glass of water. She wasn't sure what to think. Was it possible that he was really as different as he seemed? Or was she just imagining things? The image of his dark eyes, his calm but intense presence, lingered in her mind. It was strange. All her life, she had been invisible, unnoticed, a ghost in the background. But tonight, everything felt different. He had made her feel like she mattered, like she was worth something. And for a brief moment, Lena wondered if maybe, just maybe, she could find a place in this world. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice that made her heart race. "Enjoying yourself?" She turned, startled, to find Vince standing beside her. He had a slight smile on his face, but there was something in his eyes that made her stomach flip. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Well, I told you to take a break, didn't I?" Vince's tone was casual, but there was an underlying intensity in his words. He was not the kind of man who spoke without purpose. Lena nodded, feeling her pulse quicken. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to be this close, this attentive. "It's just, I never really thought I'd be in a place like this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Vince's gaze softened, and for a moment, he didn't look like the powerful man everyone feared. He looked human. "Sometimes life takes us places we never expect," he said quietly. "But that doesn't mean we don't belong there." His words lingered in the air between them, and Lena felt something stir inside her. Was he talking about her? Did he think she belonged here, with him? The thought made her nervous, but it also gave her a sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she wasn't just a maid. She was a woman, standing beside a man who saw her as something more than just a servant. It was a feeling she didn't know how to process. Vince took a step closer, and Lena's breath caught in her throat. He was so close now that she could feel the warmth of his presence. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension, and she wasn't sure what to do with the emotions rushing through her. "I'm glad you agreed to dance with me," Vince said, his voice low. "It's not often that I get to share a moment like that." Lena's heart skipped a beat. He was acknowledging her, truly acknowledging her. Not as a maid, but as a person, as someone worth his time. She didn't know what to say. The words felt stuck in her throat. So instead, she simply nodded. Vince studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable, before he offered her a small smile. "Come on," he said, his tone changing, becoming more businesslike. "Let's get some air." Lena followed him as he led her outside to the terrace. The cool night air was a welcome relief from the stuffy ballroom. Vince leaned against the railing, looking out over the city, and for a moment, the two of them stood in silence. Lena felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was real. She was here, with him, outside, away from the judgment and expectations of the others. She had always been the one to clean up after people, to serve them, to make sure they were comfortable. But now, she was standing next to Vince Romano, a man who was used to having everything he wanted, a man who could destroy her with just a word. And yet, here they were, sharing this moment. "It's beautiful out here," Lena said softly, breaking the silence. Vince turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers. "It is," he agreed, his voice quieter now, "but not as beautiful as the view inside." Lena blinked, unsure of what he meant. "Inside?" she asked, confused. "The way you held yourself tonight," he said, his gaze unwavering. "You didn't shrink away. You didn't let the others make you feel small." Lena's heart raced. Was he really saying that? She had never felt seen like this before. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice trembling. Vince's smile widened, and for the first time, she saw a glimmer of warmth in his eyes. "You matter, Lena," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "More than you know." The words hit her like a wave, and for a moment, she was speechless. She had always believed she was nothing more than a shadow in the world. But here, with him, she felt like she was more than that. She was important. She was worth something. Vince straightened up and turned to face her fully. "You're stronger than you think," he said, his tone almost tender. "And I can see that." Lena swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in her throat. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't know how to accept this newfound sense of worth. But she knew one thing for sure. Tonight, something had changed. And for the first time in a long time, Lena allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future that was more than just cleaning up after others. A future where she was seen, valued, and respected. A future where she could stand beside a man like Vince Romano and feel like she belonged. The night was winding down, but Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She had walked into this event as just another maid, blending into the background, invisible to most. But now, she felt like she had been seen, truly seen. The moment she shared with Vince outside, the way he had looked at her, like she wasn't just part of the scenery, had shaken something inside her. She had always been the one who did the work no one else wanted to do, the one who quietly stayed in the shadows. But tonight, it was different. She was no longer invisible. Vince had seen her strength, her worth. And in that moment, she saw something in him too, a side of him that was not just the powerful, cold mafia boss the world knew. There was a softness in his eyes when he looked at her, a vulnerability that few people ever saw. Lena didn't know what it meant, but she felt it, deep in her chest. As the guests began to leave, the music slowly fading into the background, Lena found herself walking back to the ballroom. But before she could make it to the doors, she was stopped by one of the other staff members, a tall woman named Jessica. "Lena, wait up," Jessica called, waving her hand to get her attention. Lena turned, her smile fading a little when she saw the look on Jessica's face. There was something in her eyes that made Lena pause. "What's going on?" Lena asked, crossing the room to meet her. Jessica glanced around, making sure no one else was within earshot, before lowering her voice. "I couldn't help but notice what happened out there," she said. Lena felt her heart race a little. What had Jessica seen? What do you mean? She asked, trying to keep her tone casual, but her nerves were starting to get the best of her. You danced with him, Jessica said, her voice low and full of disbelief. With Vince Romano, the Mafia boss. You know what that means, don't you? Lena took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had danced with Vince, yes, but she hadn't thought it meant anything more than a moment of kindness. But Jessica's words made her second-guess everything. It means I'm still his maid, Lena replied softly, looking down at the floor. I'm just doing my job. But Jessica shook her head. You're not just his maid. You're something else to him now. I can see it. I've seen the way he looks at you. People talk, Lena. And when Vince Romano looks at someone like that, it means something. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't want to believe it. She couldn't let herself get caught up in the fantasy of it all. Vince was powerful, dangerous, and she was just a maid. That's all she would ever be. I don't know what you mean, Lena said, trying to brush off the tension in the air. But Jessica's expression remained serious. Be careful, she warned. The way he's been looking at you, it's not something that just happens. He doesn't get attached to people. He doesn't let anyone close. But something's different with you, and you need to be careful. He might be playing with you, or worse, he might be falling for you. Lena felt her heart drop in her chest. Could it be true? Was Vince really falling for her? The idea seemed impossible. He was the Mafia boss, a man who lived in a world of power, control, and danger. She was nothing more than a servant. How could he see her as anything else? I'm not falling for anything, Lena said quickly, trying to push the thought out of her mind. But deep down, she couldn't deny the way Vince's words had made her feel. The way his gaze had lingered on her, as if he saw something in her no one else did. She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. I'm just doing my job, Jessica, she said firmly. That's all. But Jessica wasn't convinced. She gave her a pointed look, as if she knew Lena was lying to herself. I hope you know what you're doing, she said quietly. Because you might be playing with fire. Lena watched as Jessica turned and walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She had never felt more conflicted in her life. Vince had seen her. He had seen something in her that no one else had. But could she trust him? Was there more to his actions than just a fleeting moment of kindness? The rest of the night passed in a blur. Lena found herself going through the motions, but her mind kept drifting back to Vince, to the way he had looked at her, to the feeling that something had shifted between them. As the last of the guests finally made their way out, she was left alone in the quiet, empty ballroom. Vince had already gone, his departure unnoticed by most of the staff. But Lena couldn't help but feel his presence lingering in the air, like a memory she couldn't shake. She took a deep breath and slowly walked toward the exit, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was more to her life than cleaning up after the rich and powerful. Maybe, just maybe, she was worth something more. The next few days passed in a blur for Lena. She had gone from feeling invisible to feeling like she was being seen in ways she couldn't quite comprehend. It wasn't just Vince's attention. It was something deeper, something unsettling and thrilling all at once. Her routine had remained the same. She still worked long hours at the Romano estate, still did the things she had always done, cleaning, cooking, and serving the guests. But now, everything felt different. She could feel the weight of Vince's gaze lingering on her when he was around. The way he looked at her wasn't like how he looked at the other staff members. There was something more, something intense, almost personal. She had tried to push it to the back of her mind, to dismiss it as nothing more than the paranoia of someone who was simply unaccustomed to being treated as anything more than invisible. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between them. One evening, as she was finishing up her work, Lena found herself alone in the kitchen, wiping down the counters when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to find Vince standing in the doorway, his presence immediately commanding the room. He was dressed casually, his usual sharp attire replaced with a simple black shirt and jeans, but he still carried the same air of authority that made everyone around him take notice. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Lena's heart raced as she wiped her hands on a towel, unsure of what to say. You're still here. Vince's voice was low, almost gentle, and it sent a strange shiver down her spine. I'm finishing up, Lena replied, trying to sound normal, trying to ignore the sudden flutter of nerves in her stomach. Vince stepped closer, his eyes studying her with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only one in the room. "You've been working hard," he said, his tone soft but appreciative. "I've noticed." Lena didn't know how to respond. No one ever noticed her work. It was just something she did, something expected of her. But here he was, acknowledging it. Acknowledging her. "Thank you," she said quietly, feeling her cheeks flush. There was an awkward silence between them as Vince took another step closer. He was close now. Too close. And for a moment, Lena felt a rush of heat flood her chest. She quickly glanced away, focusing on the counter in front of her. "You should take a break," Vince said after a moment, his voice gentle, but there was something more behind it. "I know you've been working nonstop." "I'm fine," Lena replied, her voice a little too quick. "I just have a little more to do." Vince didn't move, though. He stood there for a moment, watching her. The way he looked at her, the way his dark eyes locked onto hers, sent a wave of tension through her body. For a moment, she felt like he could see right through her, like he could see every doubt, every insecurity she had. "You don't have to do this alone, you know," Vince said, his voice softening. "You're not invisible to me, Lena. You never were." The words hung in the air between them, and Lena's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This was the Mafia boss, the man who controlled everything, the one who made the world around him tremble with a single word. And yet, here he was, telling her she wasn't invisible, that she mattered. I don't know what to say," Lena whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Vince smiled, a small, almost tender smile that softened his features. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Just know that I see you. And I appreciate you." Lena's chest tightened, and for a brief moment, she felt like she might actually cry. It was so overwhelming. This kindness from a man who had everything. A man who could have anyone. And yet, he was here, talking to her like she was someone worth his time. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Vince stepped even closer, and for a moment, Lena could have sworn she saw something in his eyes, something deeper than just appreciation. Something more. He reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. The touch was soft, but there was a weight to it, like he was grounding her. "I'll let you get back to work," Vince said, his voice low, but there was an almost imperceptible sadness in his tone. "But remember, you don't have to do it alone." He stepped back, and for a moment, Lena was left standing there, completely still, trying to make sense of everything. She couldn't deny it any longer. There was something between them, something that went beyond the boundaries of their roles. And Lena wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever this was, but she knew one thing. She couldn't turn back now. As Vince left the kitchen, Lena stood frozen for a few seconds, her heart still racing. She had no idea what to make of it. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she was seen, not as a maid, not as someone who just cleaned up after others, but as Lena, a woman who mattered, a woman who was more than just invisible. Lena walked through the corridors of the Romano mansion, her mind still replaying the conversation with Vince. The touch of his hand on her shoulder, the kindness in his eyes, it all felt so surreal. She had always known her place in the world. She was just a maid, someone who existed to serve, to be unnoticed. But now, everything was different. She couldn't quite wrap her head around it. Vince Romano, the Mafia boss, the man who held so much power, had seen her, really seen her, and for a moment, he had made her feel like she mattered. As she walked past the grand hallways, she noticed the way the house seemed to glimmer in the soft light, the rich tapestries and marble floors contrasting with her own humble existence. She had always felt like an outsider in this world, the world of the powerful. And yet, the attention from Vince had made her question everything. Was there more to her life than this? Was it possible that she could have something beyond the kitchen, beyond the cleaning and the serving? She couldn't shake the thought. It lingered in her mind like a question she couldn't answer. The next morning, Lena found herself standing in the kitchen, her hands busy with the usual tasks, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't concentrate. She had been avoiding Vince since their brief conversation the night before, unsure of what to make of it. Every time their paths crossed, her heart raced, her breath quickened. She didn't know how to act around him anymore. It was as though everything had changed in an instant, but she hadn't changed. She was still the same Lena, still the maid, still the invisible woman. But the problem was, Vince had made her feel like she was more. A part of her wanted to push those feelings away, to bury them deep down where they couldn't hurt her. But another part of her, a part she didn't want to acknowledge, was afraid that she was starting to care. "Lena, can you come here for a second?" The sound of Vince's voice startled her, pulling her out of her thoughts. She turned to find him standing in the doorway of the kitchen, his eyes focused on her. For a moment, she froze. He was close, so close, and that feeling of nervousness returned, like a flutter in her chest. "Yes, Mr. Romano," she asked, her voice steady, but her heart was pounding. Vince stepped into the room, his gaze never leaving her face. "I need you to do something for me," he said, his tone calm but authoritative. Lena nodded, trying to push aside the racing thoughts in her head. "Of course, sir. What do you need?" "I've got a meeting later today with some of my associates," Vince began, walking toward the counter. "I need someone I trust to help with some preparations." Lena swallowed. She was used to being asked to help with tasks, but this felt different. Being asked to assist Vince with something important, something that involved his work, it was a strange feeling. It made her feel like she was stepping into a world she didn't belong in. "I'm happy to help," Lena replied, trying to sound confident, even though a part of her was terrified. Vince studied her for a moment, his eyes searching hers. For a split second, Lena felt exposed, like he could see every inch of her soul. But then, the moment passed, and Vince gave a small nod. "Good," he said. "I'll have someone meet you with the details. Be ready by noon." With that, he turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Lena standing there, her mind racing. What was this about? Why was he asking her to do something like this? It was as if he was giving her a chance to step into his world, to become a part of something bigger than herself. But she didn't know if she was ready for that. As the day wore on, Lena couldn't stop thinking about Vince's request. She found herself waiting anxiously for the details, her heart fluttering every time she thought about what it meant. Was this just another task? Or was this Vince's way of showing her that she mattered, that she had a place in his world? At noon, a member of Vince's security team arrived with a set of instructions for Lena. They were simple. She was to prepare a few items for the meeting and ensure that everything was set up just as Vince preferred. But the act of being included in this, of being trusted with something so important, sent a thrill through her. As she worked, Lena tried to push aside the nagging doubts in her mind. She couldn't afford to let herself get too caught up in the fantasy of it all. Vince was a powerful man, and she was just a maid. That was the reality. But no matter how hard she tried to remind herself of that, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting between them. It wasn't just the way he had looked at her or the kindness he had shown her. It was something more, a connection that neither of them could deny. When the preparations were complete, Lena stood in the corner of the room, waiting for the meeting to begin. The room was filled with the usual group of men, all sharp suits and cold eyes. And yet, in the midst of it all, Lena couldn't help but feel like she was a part of something. She had earned her place here, just by being herself. And as Vince entered the room, his eyes briefly meeting hers, Lena felt that familiar rush of warmth flood her chest. There was something between them, something undeniable, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. The meeting had gone smoothly, and Lena felt a strange sense of accomplishment as she cleared the room, her heart still racing from the quiet intensity of it all. Vince had not said much during the meeting, but his presence had filled the room. There was something magnetic about him, the way his mere existence demanded attention without a single word. It was a reminder of how out of place she felt in this world, yet somehow, she didn't mind. She was starting to feel like she was part of it, in some small, unexpected way. She gathered the last of the papers from the meeting and made her way back to the kitchen, trying to ignore the thoughts racing through her mind. Vince had been more distant today, as he always was when business was involved, but she couldn't help but wonder if things were shifting between them. The thought nagged at her, settling deep in her chest. As she entered the kitchen, she was startled to find Vince standing by the counter, a glass of water in his hand. He had already changed out of his suit, and the casual attire made him seem less intimidating, more human. His presence still carried that air of authority, but there was a softness to him now that made Lena pause. She hadn't expected to see him here, alone. She cleared her throat and spoke, trying to sound casual, though her heart was thudding in her chest. "Is there anything else I can do for you, Mr. Romano?" Vince turned to face her, his eyes locking onto hers. The intensity was still there, but now there was something else in his gaze, something unreadable. Actually, he said, his voice low, there is something. Lena's stomach fluttered, and she stood still, waiting for him to continue. Was he asking her for something personal? Or was this just about business again? I need you to meet someone, Vince said, his tone matter of fact. Lena raised an eyebrow, confused. Meet someone? Vince nodded, taking a step closer to her. Yes, I've been thinking about it for a while, he said. You've been handling everything here better than anyone expected. You're capable, responsible, and, well, you deserve more than just this. Lena's heart skipped a beat. Was he offering her something else? A position? A different role? Her mind raced with possibilities. But before she could speak, Vince raised his hand, signaling her to wait. I know this is a lot, he continued, but I've been considering something. I want you to meet my associate, John. He's someone I trust, and I think you could learn a lot from him. Lena was taken aback. This wasn't what she had been expecting. She had thought this conversation was heading in a completely different direction. John? She repeated, trying to keep her voice steady. Yes, John. Vince's gaze softened for a moment, and for the first time, Lena saw something vulnerable in his eyes. I'm offering you an opportunity, he said quietly. I want you to learn from him. I want you to expand your horizons. You don't have to stay here forever, Lena. I see potential in you. His words hung in the air, and Lena felt a rush of emotions wash over her. She had never imagined something like this. This wasn't just about the job anymore. This was about a chance to change her life. But with that thought came a sense of fear, of doubt. Was she ready for something like this? Could she step into this new world, leave behind everything she knew? She was just a maid, just someone who cleaned and served. Could she really belong in the world Vince inhabited? I don't know what to say, Lena murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Vince smiled, a small, reassuring smile that eased some of her uncertainty. You don't have to say anything right now, he said. Just think about it. I'll give you some time to decide. Lena nodded, still trying to process everything. This was an opportunity she never could have dreamed of, yet here it was, laid out before her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she had a choice. She could take this opportunity, step into a world she had never imagined for herself, or she could stay where she was, stuck in the life she had always known. The thought of leaving it all behind made her nervous, but there was a part of her that felt a pull towards something more, something bigger than herself, something that didn't involve cleaning up after others. Vince's words echoed in her mind as she walked back to her small room later that evening. He had seen her. He had seen something in her that no one else had. He had given her a chance to change her life. It was up to her now, and for the first time in a long time, Lena felt like she had the power to choose her own future. She just needed to decide if she was ready to take that step into the unknown. The next few days were filled with a whirlwind of thoughts for Lena. The offer Vince had made her lingered in her mind like an unspoken promise. He had seen something in her, something more than just a maid, more than just someone who cleaned and served. He saw potential, a future, and as much as she tried to ignore it, that feeling of possibility was starting to take root in her heart. But there was also fear. Fear of change. Fear of stepping into a world that was so far from her own. The world she knew was one of humility and quiet service. The world Vince lived in was one of power and control, a world where she didn't belong. Or did she? That was the question she kept asking herself. Could she really leave behind the life she knew, the life she had built from nothing? Could she walk away from the safety of the shadows and step into the light? The opportunity Vince had given her was tempting, but the idea of leaving everything she knew felt like an overwhelming leap into the unknown. It wasn't just about the job, it was about her identity. For so long, she had been invisible, a background figure who existed to serve the powerful. Now, for the first time, someone had looked at her and seen more. It was a strange feeling, and it left her feeling both exhilarated and terrified. Lena spent the following morning preparing the estate for the guests that were expected later that day. She moved through the rooms with precision, her mind constantly drifting back to Vince's offer. She had never imagined a future where she was anything more than a maid. But now, the possibility of something more, something bigger, was starting to feel within her reach. As she made her way to the kitchen, she found herself face to face with Vince again. He was standing near the counter, his hands resting casually on the surface, as if he had been waiting for her. "Lena," he said, his voice soft but commanding, "have you thought about what I asked you?" She hesitated, unsure of how to answer. She had thought about little else in the past few days, but the words seemed to escape her now that the moment was here. I'm still not sure," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I've never had an opportunity like this before. It's just so much to think about." Vince studied her for a moment, his eyes unwavering. There was a flicker of something in his gaze, something almost like understanding. "I know it's a lot," he said, "but you've got to trust yourself, Lena. Trust that you're capable of more than you think." Lena felt her heart beat faster. His words were like a lifeline, pulling her towards something she had always been afraid to reach for. She had spent so long being invisible, so long convincing herself that she didn't matter, that she wasn't worth more than the tasks she performed. But Vince's words, his belief in her, were starting to change that. "What if I fail?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vince shook his head. "You won't fail," he said with conviction. "You've already shown me what you're capable of. I believe in you." His words sent a surge of warmth through her, and for the first time in a long time, Lena allowed herself to believe in herself, even just for a moment. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "I'll do it. I'll take the chance." Vince's eyes lit up with a smile, and for a moment, Lena felt like she was floating. This wasn't just about a job anymore. It was about stepping into a new chapter of her life, one that she hadn't even imagined before. But now, with Vince's encouragement, it didn't seem impossible. "Good," he said, his voice full of pride. "I knew you would." As the day went on, Lena couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation building within her. She was about to embark on a new path, a path that was uncertain, yes, but full of potential. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. When the guests began to arrive, Lena found herself standing in the hallway, watching them with a sense of purpose. They moved through the estate with their usual air of superiority, oblivious to the fact that she was no longer just a maid to them. She had a purpose now, a future that was starting to unfold. And Vince, the man who had opened the door to that future, was watching her from across the room, his gaze steady and reassuring. Lena took a deep breath and walked into the room, her back straight, her steps confident. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she was ready to face it. For the first time in her life, she was ready to step out of the shadows and into the light. The days following Lena's decision felt like a shift in the fabric of her life. She had accepted the opportunity Vince had given her, but as each day passed, the reality of what she had chosen began to settle in. She had taken the first step into a new world, a world that was filled with power, influence, and endless possibilities, but it also came with its own set of challenges. Lena spent the next few weeks working closely with Vince's associate, John, who had been tasked with mentoring her. John was an imposing figure, with sharp features and a no-nonsense attitude, but he seemed genuinely invested in Lena's success. He was patient with her, teaching her about the intricacies of the business world Vince operated in, things Lena had never imagined herself being involved in. It was a lot to take in, but with each passing day, Lena found herself growing more confident. She was learning quickly, absorbing everything like a sponge. It wasn't easy. She had moments where she doubted herself, where the old fears crept in, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of falling back into the shadows. But each time she felt that familiar wave of insecurity, she remembered Vince's words. "Trust yourself, Lena. You're capable of more than you think." Those words became her mantra, the driving force that pushed her forward. She found herself spending more time with Vince as well, working alongside him on various projects. He was always calm, always in control, but Lena had started to notice the subtle shifts in his demeanor when he spoke to her. There was a warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before, a quiet respect that seemed to grow with every passing day. One afternoon, as they sat in his office going over some reports, Vince looked up from the paperwork and met Lena's gaze. "You're doing well," he said, his voice steady but full of approval. Lena's heart skipped a beat. "Thank you," she replied, trying to keep her composure. "I'm just trying to keep up." Vince smiled slightly, a rare, soft smile that made something in Lena's chest tighten. "You're doing more than keeping up," he said. "You're proving that you belong here." Lena's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, She didn't know what to say. She had spent so much of her life believing she didn't belong anywhere, that she was destined to remain in the background, unnoticed. But now, Vince was telling her that she did belong, that she had earned her place in his world. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. As the days turned into weeks, Lena continued to prove herself. She began taking on more responsibilities, handling complex tasks with confidence. She was no longer just the maid. She was a key player in Vince's world, a world that was becoming more and more familiar to her. But with each new responsibility came new challenges. There were moments when Lena felt like she was in over her head, when the pressure of it all seemed too much to bear. But she pushed through. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to give up now. It was during one of these moments of doubt that Vince stepped in. It was late one evening, and Lena had been working tirelessly on a project. She had made progress, but something wasn't sitting right with her. She couldn't quite figure out where things were going wrong. When Vince entered the room, he could immediately tell something was off. He walked over to her desk and glanced at the papers in front of her. "You're overthinking it," he said, his voice calm but firm. Lena looked up at him, frustration and exhaustion evident on her face. "I just can't seem to get it right," she admitted. "I feel like I'm missing something." Vince nodded thoughtfully, then sat down across from her. "It's not about getting everything right. It's about making the right choices with what you have." He paused for a moment before adding, "Trust your instincts, Lena. You've got a good head on your shoulders. Don't second-guess yourself." His words were exactly what she needed to hear. For the first time in a while, Lena felt the weight of her doubts begin to lift. She wasn't alone in this. Vince was there, offering her guidance and support in a way she hadn't expected. It was a quiet but powerful reminder that she had a place in this world, a place that was more than just temporary. As the weeks continued to pass, Lena became more and more entrenched in Vince's world. She had come so far, and the fear that had once plagued her started to fade. She was no longer the unsure woman who had stumbled into this world by chance. She was a confident, capable woman who had earned her place here. And as she walked through the mansion one evening, Vince by her side, she couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in such a short time. The woman who had once been invisible, who had hidden in the background, was now standing in the light. She was no longer just a maid. She was someone who had a future that she was starting to build, one step at a time. And for the first time, she felt like she could truly say that she was ready to take on whatever came next. Lena stood by the window, staring out over the city as the sun dipped below the horizon. The lights of New York flickered to life, casting a warm glow across the skyline. The view was breathtaking, but it was more than just the city she was focused on. It was her life. It had changed in ways she could never have imagined. The woman who had once felt invisible, who had quietly moved through life in the shadows, was now someone who belonged. Belonged in a way she had never dared to believe was possible. As she stood there, the sound of footsteps behind her broke her reverie. She turned to find Vince entering the room, his presence as commanding as always. There was something about him that made her pulse quicken. She had come to trust him in ways she hadn't trusted anyone before. Vince had offered her a future, a chance to break free from the confines of her past, and she had taken it. She was no longer just a maid. She had stepped into a new life, one filled with potential and opportunity. But it was also a life that was complicated. Her growing feelings for Vince were hard to ignore. He had always been a man of control, but in his presence, she felt a strange mix of comfort and uncertainty. He had opened a door for her, and now, she couldn't help but wonder what was on the other side. Vince approached her, his dark eyes studying her with a mixture of curiosity and something deeper, something unspoken. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he said, his voice low and steady. Lena felt her heart race, unsure of where this conversation would lead. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. Vince paused, as if searching for the right words. "About us," he finally said, his gaze never leaving hers. The words sent a wave of tension through Lena's body. She hadn't expected him to bring this up, not so soon. They had spent so much time focused on business, on the opportunities he had opened up for her. She had never stopped to consider what this meant for their personal relationship. But now, with the weight of his words hanging in the air, she realized how much she had been avoiding the truth. There was something between them, something more than just the professional bond they had built. Vince moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the quiet room. He was always in control, always the one calling the shots, but there was a softness to him now, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "I know things have changed between us," Vince said, his voice quieter now. "But I need to know if you're ready for what comes next." Lena felt her breath catch in her throat. What did he mean by that? Was he asking her to commit to something more? Was he asking for more than just her professional help? She had always admired Vince from a distance, but she hadn't allowed herself to think about him in a way that went beyond work. She had spent too many years hiding, too many years telling herself she wasn't worthy of anything more. But now, everything had shifted. Vince was asking her to be a part of his world in a way that went beyond the role he had given her. It was a world of power, of influence, of control. But it was also a world that was filled with uncertainties. I don't know what to say," Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. Vince looked at her with a mixture of understanding and something deeper. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said, his voice steady. "I just need you to know that whatever happens next, I'm here for you." His words felt like a promise, a vow that Lena wasn't sure how to process. She had always been afraid of trusting others, of letting someone in. But Vince was different. She had never felt this way before, and it both terrified and exhilarated her. "I'm ready," Lena said, her voice steady but soft. She didn't fully understand what she was agreeing to, but she knew one thing. She was ready to take the next step, no matter where it led. Vince's expression softened, and for the first time, Lena saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a tenderness that she hadn't expected. "Good," he said, his voice full of approval. "We'll do this together. Whatever comes next, we'll face it as a team." His words were like a weight lifting off her shoulders, and for the first time, Lena allowed herself to believe in the possibility of what they could become. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she was no longer afraid to find out. The world she had stepped into was full of uncertainties, but it was also full of promise. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she had a future, one that she could build on her own terms. As the night wore on, Lena felt a sense of calm settle over her. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just a maid. She was a woman with a future, and that future was hers to shape. With Vince by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. Lena woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. The sun had barely risen, and the estate was quiet, still bathed in the early morning light. But in her mind, everything was shifting. The conversation with Vince the night before had changed something inside her, of his operations. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she was ready. She had learned so much in the past few weeks, and she was eager to show Vince that she was capable of more. When she entered the conference room, Vince was already there, his back to her as he looked over some documents. He didn't turn when she walked in, but she could feel his presence filling the room, the quiet authority he commanded without even trying. For a moment, she hesitated at the door. This was it. The moment that would either confirm her place in his world or show her that she wasn't cut out for it. But she squared her shoulders and walked in, taking a seat across from him. He finally turned to face her, his eyes scanning her as if he were reading her every thought. "You're here," he said, his voice calm. "I wasn't sure if you'd be ready." Lena met his gaze, her heart steadying as she looked at him. "I'm ready," she said, her voice clear, filled with the certainty she hadn't known she possessed. Vince nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Good," he said. "This isn't going to be easy, Lena. The people I work with, the decisions I make, they come with consequences. There's no room for mistakes." His words were sharp, but not unkind. It wasn't an invitation to second-guess herself, it was a challenge. "I understand," Lena said, her voice steady. She wasn't backing down now. She had come this far. There was no going back. Over the next hour, they discussed plans, strategies, and the future of Vince's operations. It was a world Lena had never known, a world where power and influence were currency, and decisions were made with the weight of countless lives resting on them. But as they spoke, Lena realized something. She wasn't just there to observe. She was a part of it. She had earned her place at the table. Vince looked at her several times during the conversation, as if measuring her, watching how she reacted to the information. He didn't hold back, didn't shield her from the reality of what his world was. He wanted her to see everything, to understand what came with the power he held. And for the first time, Lena felt herself rising to meet the challenge. She wasn't overwhelmed. She wasn't intimidated. She was present, fully engaged, contributing to the conversation in ways she hadn't thought herself capable of. Vince was right. This wasn't going to be easy, but she was ready for it. As the meeting drew to a close, Vince leaned back in his chair and regarded her quietly for a moment. "You did well," he said, his tone approving. "I didn't expect you to handle it so easily." Lena felt a rush of pride at his words, but she didn't let herself smile. "Thank you," she said, keeping her composure. Vince stood up, moving toward the window as he stared out at the city below. "You're more than I expected, Lena," he said, his voice quieter now. "You're not just capable, you're exactly what I need." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Lena wasn't sure what to make of it. Was it just business? Or was there something more between them? She couldn't tell, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. She had already crossed a line, stepping into his world. She didn't need to complicate things by thinking too much about what this was. "I'm here to do whatever it takes," Lena said, her voice steady. "I'm ready to learn and to help in any way I can." Vince turned back to face her, his gaze softening. For a moment, there was no power dynamic, no distance between them. There was just understanding. "I know," he said simply, "and that's why I trust you." As Lena left the room, she felt a sense of fulfillment wash over her. She had proven herself. She had shown Vince that she was ready for whatever came next. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she had a place, somewhere she truly belonged, not as a maid, not as someone who was invisible, but as someone who mattered. The days passed, and Lena found herself more immersed in Vince's world than ever before. What had started as a quiet change in her routine had blossomed into a transformation she couldn't fully comprehend. Every day she spent alongside Vince and his team, she learned more about the business, about herself, and about what it truly meant to be a part of something greater than herself. She had begun to trust herself in ways she never had before. The fear that had once gripped her, that she wasn't good enough or capable enough, was beginning to fade. But with this new confidence came new challenges. One of them, perhaps the most daunting, was the growing closeness between her and Vince. What had started as respect and professionalism seemed to be shifting into something else. It was subtle at first, small gestures, words laced with a deeper meaning, but it was unmistakable. She found herself questioning things she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. Was it possible for someone like her, someone who had spent most of her life unseen, to be more than just a servant in Vince's world? Was there a place for her beyond the roles she had always played? The question lingered in her mind, unresolved, as she continued her work. Every time Vince looked at her with those dark, thoughtful eyes, her heart skipped a beat, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he saw something in her, a potential she hadn't realized she had. She had long ago stopped being just a maid. She was learning to become a partner, someone who could stand beside him, not just serve him. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the weight of the expectations, both from Vince and from herself, seemed almost too much to bear. But she pushed through. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to let anything hold her back now. One afternoon, as the sun began to set and the mansion filled with the golden light of dusk, Vince called Lena into his office. She was surprised. He had always been so composed, so measured, but today there was something different in his voice, something that made her pulse quicken. "Lena, come in," he said, his tone warm but serious. Lena entered the room, her heart thudding in her chest. Vince was standing near the window, his back to her, but as soon as she stepped inside, he turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, and Lena immediately felt the weight of his gaze on her. "I need to talk to you about something important," he said, his voice steady. Lena nodded, unsure of what this conversation would bring. "Of course, Vince," she replied, her voice calm, though her heart was racing. Vince took a deep breath before speaking again. "You've proven yourself to me in ways I never expected," he began. "Your dedication, your intelligence, the way you handle things, it's been impressive." Lena felt a rush of pride at his words, but she also couldn't shake the sense of unease that was creeping in. What was he leading up to? "Thank you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Vince paused, looking at her with a soft intensity that made her stomach flutter. "You're not just a part of this business anymore," he said, his voice low. "You're someone I rely on, someone I trust. And I want you to know that. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Vince's words felt like a confession, but there was something else beneath them. Something deeper, something that made her feel both elated and terrified. She had never imagined this. Never imagined that someone like Vince, a man so powerful, so distant, could see her as more than just someone who worked for him. I don't know what to say, Lena whispered, her heart racing in her chest. Vince stepped closer, and for a moment, Lena felt like she couldn't breathe. He was so close now that she could feel the heat radiating off his body. You don't have to say anything, he replied, his voice soft. I just want you to know that you've become more than just an asset to me. You've become someone I value, someone I care about. His words hung in the air, heavy and meaningful. Lena's chest tightened, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if she could trust herself to speak. She had spent so much time keeping her emotions in check, so much time telling herself that this, whatever this was, couldn't be real. But now, standing in front of him, she realized that it was. He cared about her, and she cared about him, in ways that scared her. Lena began, but the words wouldn't come. Vince reached out, his hand gently cupping her chin, lifting her gaze to meet his. You don't need to say anything right now, he said, his voice gentle but firm. But I want you to know that I'm here for you. And I'm not going anywhere. The words hit her like a wave, sweeping over her with such intensity that she almost couldn't process them. She had always feared that she was unworthy, that someone like her could never be a part of this world, of Vince's world. But now, standing in front of him, feeling his warmth, his presence, she couldn't help but believe it. She didn't have all the answers, but she was ready to face whatever came next. She was ready to stand beside him, not just as his employee, not just as someone who served him, but as his equal. For the first time in her life, Lena felt like she truly belonged. She didn't have to hide anymore. She didn't have to be invisible. Vince had seen her, and for the first time, she saw herself. The weeks that followed were filled with a growing sense of belonging, a feeling Lena had never truly experienced before. With each passing day, she found herself not only learning more about the business, but also about herself. The hesitation she once felt about stepping into Vince's world had transformed into confidence. What had started as a tentative step forward now felt like a solid foundation beneath her feet. She was no longer just playing the part of an outsider. She was an integral part of the operations, a person Vince trusted and valued. And with that came both a sense of purpose and a challenge. Vince had given her more responsibility, more decision-making power. It was clear that he saw her potential, but as the stakes grew higher, so did her doubts. Was she truly ready for everything that was being asked of her? She had once lived in the background, invisible, always measuring herself by what others expected of her. But now, she had to measure herself by her own standards. She could no longer hide behind the familiar comfort of the shadows. She had to step into the light, and there was no turning back. One afternoon, as Lena reviewed some reports in the office, Vince entered the room, his presence as commanding as ever. He had always been someone who carried authority effortlessly, but today there was something different about him. His usual calm demeanor seemed tempered with an edge of seriousness that immediately caught Lena's attention. Lena, he began, his voice steady. We have a meeting later today. There's something important I need you to prepare. She nodded, her mind immediately shifting into professional mode. Of course, Vince. What do you need? He moved closer, his gaze locked on hers, and for a moment, there was a brief silence between them. This isn't just about business, he said, his tone softening slightly. It's about the next steps, about you and me, about what we're building here. The words struck her like a bolt of lightning, and Lena felt a rush of emotions flood her chest. Was he talking about the future? About their future? She had known that their relationship had been evolving, but hearing him say it out loud made everything feel more real. Vince didn't break his gaze. You've done more than just prove yourself, Lena. You've earned a place in my world, and I'm not taking that lightly. But there's more ahead, more that we need to face together. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had come so far, and yet, the weight of what he was saying settled heavily on her shoulders. She had never allowed herself to think too far ahead, never dared to imagine what a future with someone like Vince might look like. But now it was all so clear. She wasn't just here to learn or to help. She was here to build something lasting, something significant. And that meant confronting the very fears she had spent so long burying. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. "I want to be a part of this, Vince. I want to build something with you." Vince's expression softened, and for a moment, the man who had always seemed untouchable and distant became someone more tangible, more human. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, a gesture that was simple yet powerful. "I'm glad to hear that," he said quietly. "I've always believed in you, Lena. And now, I need you to believe in yourself as much as I believe in you." The sincerity in his voice made her heart swell. It was a reassurance she didn't know she needed, but one that she now realized she had been craving all along. They were partners in this, whatever this was. She wasn't alone. They would face whatever came next, together. The rest of the meeting was focused on the details of their plans, but the words Vince had spoken echoed in Lena's mind long after the meeting had ended. She wasn't just a part of the team anymore. She was more than that. She had become someone Vince relied on, someone he trusted. And with that came a new level of responsibility. As Lena returned to her office, the weight of it all settled on her shoulders. The fear was still there, but it was different now. It wasn't paralyzing. It was motivating. She had a purpose. She had a role. And she was ready for whatever came next. But as she looked out of the window, her thoughts drifted to Vince again. What did this mean for their future, for their relationship? She had never imagined that someone like him would see her as an equal. She had always thought of herself as unworthy, as someone destined to remain in the background. But now, here she was, standing beside him, facing the future together. It wasn't going to be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever was. And Lena was ready to face it head on, knowing that she wasn't alone. Not anymore.